The first time Curtis Briggs stepped foot onto my dock, I knew trouble had arrived in pressed khakis. He was new, freshly retired from some high-level management position in Chicago, and apparently determined to micromanage the serenity out of our lakeside neighborhood. The HOA had recently elected him president, and within weeks, he'd started circulating memos about visual harmony and aesthetic cohesion. Those were just fancy terms for make everything look like him, bland, beige, and boring. I'd lived on Lake Olin for 30 years. Long before Lakeside Preserve became a gated community. Long before there was an HOA. My father built the dock himself, using cedar planks and stubbornness. It was weathered now, silvered with age and memory, but solid as ever. It was where we caught catfish, where I taught my daughter to tie a fisherman's knot, where my dad's old bass boat, Blue Bell, still rocked gently in the breeze. So when I opened the letter taped to my door that morning, I didn't expect a threat. Your dock is in violation of HOA Regulation 14B, unapproved structures on shared waterways. Please remove it within 30 days to avoid suspension of lake access privileges. I stood on my porch, letter trembling slightly in my hand, and watched a group of ducks glide past my unapproved structure. Rage simmered beneath the surface, but I kept it capped for now. That evening, at the HOA's monthly meeting, I walked into the clubhouse and spotted Curtis at the head of the table, flanked by two board members who nodded a bit too eagerly at every word he spoke. He had the look of someone used to being obeyed. "I'd like to address this letter I received," I said, stepping forward. Curtis glanced up. Mr. Jensen. Yes, your dock has been brought to our attention." "Brought to your attention by who?" "Multiple residents," he replied smoothly, folding his hands. "They've expressed concern that it detracts from the lake's uniform appearance." "That dock predates your entire subdivision," I snapped. "It's legally part of my property and has been for 3 decades. "Yes, well, things change," Curtis said with a smile so tight it was practically barbed wire. "Lakeside Preserve has standards now. We can't have structures that disrupt the visual continuity. And if I don't remove it..." He tapped a manila folder and slid it toward me. Inside was a stack of policy printouts, regulations, and an ominous clause about revoking community amenities, including lake access. "We'll have to disable your access to the boat ramp," he said. "It's not personal. Just policy." Just policy. The words echoed in my ears like gunshots in fog. Behind me, someone coughed. Another board member adjusted his glasses, but said nothing. No one looked me in the eye. This wasn't about a dock. It was about control. Curtis wasn't building a community. He was molding a kingdom. And my dock. It was a crack in the porcelain facade he was desperate to seal. I left the meeting with my blood pounding and my jaw clenched. That night, I stood at the edge of the dock, one boot resting on the first plank. The lake shimmered under the moonlight, quiet and untouched. Blue Bell rocked gently beside me, her ropes creaking softly, like an old friend whispering defiance. I wasn't just fighting for a piece of wood. I was fighting for memory. For history. For every person in this neighborhood too tired, too polite, or too scared to stand up to Curtis Briggs and his paper-thin tyranny. He thought a letter could push me off my own lake? He had no idea what was coming. The first sign of escalation came 2 days later. Orange hazard tape wrapped around my dock like some gaudy crime scene. A laminated notice had been stapled to one of the cedar posts. Unauthorized structure, subject to removal per HOA Regulation 14B. No signature. No warning. Just the cold authority of a man who preferred paperwork over people. I tore the notice off and crumpled it, but the pit in my stomach stayed. Curtis wasn't bluffing. He was laying the groundwork, documenting violations, creating a paper trail, setting me up for enforcement. I'd seen it before, the same passive-aggressive strategy corporate managers used to push out employees they couldn't fire outright. Only this time, it was my land, my dock, my life. I spent the next day poring over the original Lakeside Preserve Charter, the one we signed a decade ago when the HOA first formed. Buried in the fine print was a grandfather clause, barely a paragraph long. Pre-existing structures that do not obstruct communal access and are located on private easements shall remain exempt from future design regulations. There it was. My shield. I printed copies, highlighted every word, and walked them over to the next HOA meeting. Curtis didn't look up when I entered, just kept scribbling in his leather-bound notebook like I was a mild annoyance, not a property owner asserting his rights. I dropped the paper in front of him. You can't touch my dock. It's legally exempt. He finally raised his eyes. Our legal team disagrees. You have a legal team? He smiled. We consulted a firm, just to ensure we're aligned with municipal guidelines. Translation: he'd used HOA funds to buy validation. Or, at least the illusion of it. I'll take this to the county if I have to, I warned. Curtis closed the folder with a soft thump. That's your right, Mr. Jensen. But until then, your lake privileges are suspended pending compliance. The following morning, the lock on the community boat ramp was changed. I found out the hard way, standing at the gate with a fishing rod and a cooler full of bait, watching the sunrise spill over water I could no longer reach. Curtis emerged from the clubhouse nearby, latte in hand, sunglasses perched like a crown. I told you this didn't have to be difficult, he said, voice smooth as varnish. You just don't like being contradicted. He smiled, unbothered. It's not about contradiction. It's about cohesion. One dock becomes 2, then 10. Next thing you know, the lake looks like a junkyard. That dock's part of my family, I said. You think a lake's just scenery. It's not. It's legacy. Curtis adjusted his sunglasses. Legacy's only as strong as the rules that preserve it. That was his game, weaponize order to erase individuality. Dress it up as standards, but make no mistake, it was domination in khaki and cologne. I returned home seething. Hours passed in silence. Then, as dusk settled, I pulled out my phone and opened the Lakeside Preserve Neighborhood Watch Group, one of Curtis's pride and joy creations. I recorded a short video, holding up the orange violation notice and reading from the grandfather clause. Then I turned the camera to Bluebell resting quietly beside my dock. They say this dock ruins the view. I say it is the view. 30 years. No complaints until now. You let them take this, they'll come for your shutters, your porch swing, your birdhouses. Whatever doesn't fit the mold gets paved over. Is that the kind of neighborhood we want? I posted it before I could talk myself out of it. By morning, it had over 400 likes and a flood of comments. They fined me for hanging wind chimes. Curtis told my son his skateboard ramp was non-compliant. This is why I moved out last year. They crushed everything fun. Something shifted. The conversation Curtis had so carefully controlled was slipping through his fingers. And for the first time, I wasn't standing alone on that dock. I had voices behind me. But Curtis wasn't done. Not by a long shot. That week, he filed a formal infraction. I received a certified letter stating I was officially non-compliant with Section 14B and that repeat violations would result in a lien placed on my property. He was upping the ante. But I wasn't folding. This wasn't just a dispute anymore, it was a siege. And I was done playing defense. Curtis thought he'd cornered me. He'd locked the boat ramp. Filed formal violations. Threatened liens. But what he didn't realize, what he couldn't realize, is that I didn't need permission to fight back. I just needed the right angle. And I found it on a quiet Tuesday morning, sipping black coffee on my porch while scrolling through HOA newsletters. There it was, tucked into a self-congratulatory blurb from Curtis. Lakeside Preserve's annual community fishing derby, June 14th, all residents welcome to launch from the main ramp and enjoy a day of friendly competition. I almost choked on my coffee. The main ramp. The one currently padlocked and under Curtis's control. The one the HOA claimed was off-limits to residents like me for non-compliance. So let me get this straight, Curtis. You close off the ramp to punish me, but open it back up for your pet project? A headline event where families will gather, boats will launch, and Curtis Briggs gets to play man of the people in a crisp polo shirt? I smiled. That was his blind spot. He thought HOA power was absolute. But that event? That was public. That meant permits, insurance, lake safety coordination with the county, and I had friends at every level of local government. I made a few calls. First, I contacted the county clerk's office and asked if the HOA had submitted the required lake use permit for mass recreational access. The answer? A polite but definitive no. Next, I called the Department of Wildlife. They confirmed that the lake's annual stocking, something timed specifically for the Derby, was publicly funded. And while the HOA could host an event, they couldn't restrict access to anyone, especially not property owners with documented easements. Which I had. On paper and signed by a judge, no less, back when the lake was still open-access farmland. The final piece came from my friend Elise, a retired fisheries biologist who still volunteered for lake monitoring. She'd worked with me on cleanup projects years ago. When I told her what Curtis was doing, she didn't hesitate. I'll pull the water quality report. If they're hosting a fishing derby without testing runoff levels from the East Bank, they could be in serious violation. Curtis had turned this into a legal war.
Fine.
I'd fight it like one. I compiled everything, emails, records, and the permit discrepancies, into a packet and sent it to the HOA board with a blunt subject line. Proposed injunction against illegal fishing event on Lake Olin. I CC'd Curtis, of course. The response came quickly, panicked emails, urgent requests for a private conversation, and then, finally, a knock at my door. Curtis. He wasn't wearing khakis this time, just sweatpants and a hoodie, like someone trying to hide from his own reflection. "We don't have to take this any further," he said, voice low. "You've made your point." "No," I said. "I don't think I have. Not yet. This hurts the whole community. Kids look forward to that derby. Families. Then maybe the community should rethink who they've put in charge," I interrupted. "You weaponized your position to punish me. All I did was push back, with facts." Curtis glanced at the lake. It was placid, unbothered. Uninterested in his struggle. "You're going to sink the whole event?" "I'm going to let the county enforce its own rules," I said. "If that sinks your event, maybe it wasn't seaworthy to begin with." That Friday, a formal notice went out to all residents. Due to permitting conflicts and water safety concerns, the 14th annual fishing derby has been canceled. We appreciate your understanding. The HOA message board lit up like a bonfire. Parents demanded answers. Longtime residents questioned Curtis's leadership. Some asked why the ramp was locked in the first place. The conversation was no longer under his control. It was wide open, raw, and public. And as for me, I didn't say a word. I simply unlocked my dock gate, climbed into Blue Bell, and drifted onto Lake Olin, alone, free, and finally, unshackled from their petty rules. Curtis had tried to block my boat access, but I had just sunk his entire fishing season. Summer rolled in slower than usual that year. Without the fishing derby, the lake sat quiet. No aluminum boats. No kids casting lines off the pier. No Curtis strutting around with a megaphone, pretending to be captain of a ship no one wanted to board. Instead, neighbors gathered in smaller, more personal ways. Potlucks on porches, quiet kayak mornings, impromptu dock concerts by teenagers with guitars and shaky harmonies. The HOA wasn't gone, but something in its shadow had shifted. Its grip loosened. And Curtis? He faded like a wet footprint on a sun-baked deck. After the canceled derby, he tried to retake control, called emergency meetings, proposed new fines, even suggested a temporary ramp closure extension for maintenance and compliance reviews. But the board had seen enough. And more importantly, so had the neighborhood. By the end of July, a group of residents filed a motion to recall the sitting board. They gathered signatures faster than expected. Turns out, wind chime fines, rogue mailbox paint colors, and my boat access dispute weren't isolated grievances. They were patterns of petty tyranny. Curtis never saw it coming. At the recall meeting, he walked in with his usual slicked hair and smug grin, but left pale, hollow-eyed, and one title lighter. Unanimous vote. No debate. No sympathy. The new board, led by Marla Collins, a local librarian with a backbone of steel and a Rolodex of Robert's rules, dismantled the old regime piece by piece. First to go was Regulation 14B, the dock restriction clause. Then came a vote to reopen the community ramp, unrestricted to all residents in good standing, regardless of how their easements were interpreted. They even invited me to join the board. I politely declined. My war was over, and I had no taste for politics, only peace. Instead, I helped Elise and a few others launch a community lake co-op. We partnered with local wildlife groups, organized monthly cleanup dives, even started a junior fishing league, with open access, of course. No locks. No tape. Just community, built on respect rather than rules. Curtis moved out that fall. Quietly, like a ghost sliding out the back door of his own haunted house. Rumor was he took a job in another HOA across the county. Poor souls. I almost felt bad for them. Almost. One crisp October evening, I stood on my dock watching the sun dip low, burning gold across the lake. Bluebell bobbed gently behind me. I'd just finished teaching a kid how to tie a Palomar knot, his first time fishing. His grin had reminded me of my dad, steady and full of wonder. That's what this lake had always been about. Not regulations. Not control. Memory. Legacy. Life. A soft voice pulled me from a moment. "Hey, Mr. Jensen." I turned. It was Marla, holding a clipboard, sheepish but proud. "Thought you should know," she said, tapping the paper. "We passed a new charter clause today. Protects all pre-existing structures on private lots. Dock, sheds, swing sets, everything. Permanently exempt." I nodded, heart quiet and full. "About time," I said. She lingered. "You could have walked away, you know. After the first violation." I looked out at the water. "I could have," I said. "But if I had, this view wouldn't be here. Not like this." Marla smiled, then left me alone with the hush of lapping waves. I took a breath, deep and clear, then cast a line into the water. No war. No politics. Just peace. And sometimes, that's the loudest victory of all.